In the stars above a black garden exists a kingdom called the Heaven's Womb, and there live a race of celestial lore-keepers. They are known as the Polaris. The Polaris are separated into two different castes: the Astrum, the royal few who preside and maintain recorded history, and the Lumen, the diligent many who travel the stars to gather this knowledge. Every Lumen is granted a piece of a newborn star, or star shard, to nurture as they travel the stars on their voyage for knowledge, and given a vessel to blend in. This pilgrimage is considered a rite of passage for young Lumen. This is the story of one such Lumen, the story of their pilgrimage, and the story of their fall. This young Lumen was given the details of his pilgrimage. The destination would be the planet Earth. The celestial archives had not been updated for this planet in several centuries, and the Lumen was tasked with learning of how their culture and people had changed to ensure that their records would remain current. The Lumen was assigned his star shard, which took the form of a scarf, and given strict orders: do not interact with humans more than is strictly necessary. The Lumen set off on his pilgrimage, soaring through the cosmos until finally arriving at his destination, Earth. He intended only to stay for a few days, to gather the knowledge he needed to prove himself to the Astrum, then take his leave. But something happened the young Lumen did not anticipate. Taking the name Sora Ryuusei, the Lumen began his mission. But as he began to interact and mingle with this curious race, he found himself having fun and truly treasuring his time spent with them. The Polaris were his family, but they were also a cold and distant people. These humans, however, were full of warmth and life. They were unlike anything he had ever experienced, and he found himself spending longer than he had planned on Earth. Too long. The Lumen realized he had spent far too long on his pilgrimage, becoming lost in his revels with these humans. In a panic, he set off from Earth, but his hasty departure did not go unremarked, with the sight of a shooting star launching away from the planet being seen by many of the humans he had spent time with. The Lumen returned to his people, now faced a reckoning. He had barely gathered any usable knowledge for the archives. He had wasted precious time interacting with those outside the Heaven's Womb, and he had potentially revealed his true form and jeopardized all they had worked for. Such mistakes could not go unpunished, and so the Astrum decided the Lumen would no longer live among them. He would be cast out of the Heaven's Womb, down below into the Black Garden, a nightmarish realm of twisted boughs and unknown horrors. And thus, the Lumen was exiled. He fell from the stars, hurtling into the dark abyss that awaited below. As the stars seemed to fade away before him, all the Lumen could do was reach out desperately and watch as the light faded away. As the Lumen came to, the gravity of the situation began to set in. None ever escaped the grasp of the Black Garden. The terrors lurking within defied reason and knowledge. The very garden itself, the antithesis of the Polaris. The Lumen could do nothing but wander the darkness and wait for oblivion to find him. But in the distance, the Lumen saw something he did not expect. A light, shining through the darkness ever so faintly. With no other options left to him, he ran towards the light. As the light grew brighter and brighter, the creatures lurking in the shadows of the Black Garden seemed to retreat, allowing the Lumen to approach unhindered. The light emanated from an enormous white tree, standing defiant of the oppressive darkness. The lumen reached out his hand. There was no knowing what would happen next, but his only other option was to face the horrors of the garden alone. So, he placed his hand on the warm bark of the tree, and a gentle white light shone forth, enveloping everything. As the light faded, the lumen found himself in what looked like a very similar garden clearing. But, unlike the Black Garden, this place was filled with light and life. It felt warm and welcoming. As he takes in these new surroundings, a voice calls out from below. The lumen looked down to see a small mushroom creature hailing him. The mushroom introduced itself as Sylphe, the royal pathfinder, and asked what brought a lumen to these lands. The lumen told his story, and Sylphe agreed to take him to seek an audience with the one who presided over this white garden. As they traveled the forest, Sylphe explained the nature of this place. Existing as a light in the darkness counter to the Black Garden, the White Garden was a realm that existed in the liminal space between dream and reality, and was home to all manner of fey creatures who sought a place of refuge. The two arrived at the Grey Palace, and there the lumen met with the ruler of the White Garden. A tall, imposing, and regal bug stood before him. This was the Nightmare King, Light. Standing at its side, to the lumen's amazement, was an Astrum. The Astrum introduced himself as Nova, who served as the king's knight and companion. The lumen bowed before these two imposing figures and recounted his tale. The king was moved by the fallen lumen's plight and saw fit to grant him a home in the White Garden, an old abandoned spire sitting at the heart of a pristine mountain lake. This lake would become known as the Sidereal Margin. The lumen, now referring to himself by the name he had adopted on Earth, found himself a new home at the Sidereal Margin. As he stood atop the old spire and looked up at the stars he once called home, he felt both joy and melancholy. He could never return to his old home, but perhaps here, in the White Garden, surrounded by new faces and new friends, he might seek to make a new one. And so, Sora Ryuusei smiled and faced this new beginning.